Hello everyone. As we know, there were many famous events during World War II. Today, in this video, I will introduce to you the 5 most famous air raids. So, let's get started. The Doolittle Raid, officially known as the Tokyo Raid, was a daring and pivotal air raid conducted by the United States during World War II. After the devastating attack on Pearl Harbor by the Imperial Japanese Navy on December 7, 1941, the United States was eager to strike back at Japan and boost American morale. In the months following Pearl Harbor, Japan's military forces seemed invincible as they continued to expand their control across the Pacific. In early 1942, Lieutenant Colonel James "Jimmy" Doolittle, an accomplished aviator and military leader, proposed a plan to launch a surprise air raid on Japan using carrier-based B-25 Mitchell bombers. The plan was risky as it involved launching bombers from an aircraft carrier, which had never been done before. Thus, a group of volunteer pilots and crew members underwent intensive training for the mission. They practiced short takeoffs and landings on improvised runways, simulating the conditions they would face when taking off from the cramped deck of an aircraft carrier. On April 18, 1942, 16 B-25 bombers, each carrying a 5-man crew, took off from the aircraft carrier USS Hornet, led by Colonel Doolittle himself. The bombers flew low and fast over the Japanese mainland, dropping bombs on military and industrial targets in Tokyo, Yokohama, and other cities. While the physical damage inflicted by the raid was relatively minor, it had significant psychological and strategic effects. It demonstrated to the Japanese people and military leaders that their homeland was vulnerable to attack, boosting American morale and proving that Japan was not invincible. Additionally, it forced the Japanese to divert military resources for homeland defense, weakening their forces in other areas. Due to the limited range of the B-25 bombers, none of them were able to return to the USS Hornet after the raid. Most of the crews crash-landed or bailed out over China, where they were helped by Chinese civilians and resistance fighters. The Doolittle Raid remains one of the most celebrated and iconic events of World War II, symbolizing American ingenuity, courage, and determination. It showcased the effectiveness of joint Army-Navy operations and paved the way for future strategic bombing campaigns against Japan. James Doolittle and the Raiders became national heroes, and their legacy continues to inspire generations of military aviators and historians. The Schweinfurt-Regensburg Mission was one of the most significant and costly strategic bombing raids conducted by the United States Army Air Forces during World War II. By 1943, the Allies had intensified their bombing campaign against Nazi Germany, aiming to cripple its war machine and industrial infrastructure. The Schweinfurt-Regensburg Mission was part of this broader strategic effort to target key German industrial centers. The primary objectives of the mission were to strike 2 vital targets: the ball bearing factories in Schweinfurt and the Messerschmitt aircraft assembly plant in Regensburg. Ball bearings were critical components used in almost every aspect of German military production, making the Schweinfurt factories a high-priority target. Meanwhile, disrupting the production of Messerschmitt fighter planes in Regensburg was seen as essential to weakening the Luftwaffe's air superiority. The mission involved a long-distance daylight bombing raid, which posed significant challenges due to the range limitations of Allied bombers and the formidable German air defenses. The plan called for a coordinated attack by hundreds of Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress bombers, escorted by P-47 Thunderbolt and P-51 Mustang fighters. On August 17, 1943, over 350 B-17 bombers took off from airfields in England to conduct the raid. However, due to navigational errors, communication breakdowns, and adverse weather conditions, the mission suffered from poor coordination and suffered heavy losses. The bombers encountered fierce resistance from German fighter planes and anti-aircraft defenses. The Schweinfurt-Regensburg mission was a costly failure for the Allies. Of the 376 B-17s that participated, 60 were shot down over enemy territory, and another 55 were severely damaged. The losses amounted to over 600 aircrew killed, wounded, or captured, with many becoming prisoners of war. Furthermore, the damage inflicted on the targeted German industrial sites was less than anticipated, as many bombers failed to hit their intended targets. Despite its high cost, the mission provided valuable lessons for future Allied bombing campaigns. It underscored the importance of improved fighter escort tactics, long-range fuel tanks, and better navigational aids. The Allies recognized the need for continued air superiority over enemy territory and intensified efforts to develop more effective bombing strategies. The Schweinfurt-Regensburg Mission highlighted the immense challenges and risks associated with daylight precision bombing raids deep into enemy territory. It also demonstrated the resilience and determination of both Allied aircrews and German defenders. While the mission did not achieve its immediate objectives, it contributed to the evolution of Allied air power and paved the way for more successful bombing campaigns later in the war. The Ploiești Air Raid, also known as Operation Tidal Wave, was one of the most audacious and daring bombing missions undertaken by the Allies during World War II. Ploiești, located in present-day Romania, was home to one of Nazi Germany's most critical sources of oil production. The Ploiești oil fields supplied a substantial portion of Germany's fuel for its military operations, making them a prime strategic target for the Allies. The primary objective of Operation Tidal Wave was to cripple the Ploiești oil refineries and production facilities, thereby disrupting the flow of oil to the Axis war machine. The destruction of these facilities would severely hamper Germany's ability to wage war and sustain its military operations. Operation Tidal Wave was meticulously planned and involved the coordination of hundreds of aircraft from multiple Allied air forces. The mission called for a low-level bombing raid to evade enemy radar detection and anti-aircraft defenses. The bombers would fly from airfields in North Africa to Romania, a distance of over 1,200 miles, and strike their targets with precision. On August 1, 1943, a total of 178 B-24 Liberator bombers, divided into 5 groups, took off from airfields in Libya to conduct the raid. The bombers flew at extremely low altitudes, skirting over the Mediterranean Sea and crossing the rugged terrain of the Balkans to reach their targets. The element of surprise was crucial to the success of the mission. Operation Tidal Wave faced numerous challenges, including intense anti-aircraft fire from the ground and attacks by German fighter planes. The low-level flight path exposed the bombers to enemy fire, resulting in heavy losses. Despite the risks, the Allied aircrews pressed on with determination, knowing the importance of their mission. The Ploiești Air Raid was a costly endeavor for the Allies, with over 50 bombers shot down and many others sustaining damage. Despite the heavy losses, the raid inflicted significant damage on the Ploiești oil refineries, temporarily disrupting production and forcing the Germans to allocate resources for repairs. While the raid did not completely cripple the Ploiești oil fields, it succeeded in disrupting German oil production and supply lines, contributing to the overall Allied war effort. The Ploiești Air Raid remains one of the most memorable and celebrated bombing missions of World War II. It showcased the courage and determination of Allied aircrews and underscored the importance of strategic bombing in modern warfare. The sacrifices made by the crews of Operation Tidal Wave are remembered as a testament to their bravery and commitment to victory against the Axis powers. The Tokyo Firebombing, also known as the Operation Meeting House, was a devastating aerial bombardment carried out by the United States Army Air Forces against the Japanese capital during World War II. By early 1945, Japan's military situation in the Pacific had become increasingly desperate. The Allies were advancing steadily across the Pacific, and Japan's ability to wage war was diminishing. In an effort to hasten Japan's surrender and bring an end to the war, the Allies intensified their bombing campaign against Japanese cities. Operation Meeting House was meticulously planned and involved the coordination of hundreds of B-29 Superfortress bombers. The mission called for a massive incendiary bombing raid, with the bombers targeting densely populated residential areas of Tokyo known for their wooden structures. On March 9 to 10, 1945, over 300 B-29 bombers took off from airfields in the Mariana Islands and flew towards Tokyo. The bombers dropped thousands of tons of incendiary bombs, creating a massive firestorm that engulfed large parts of the city. The combination of high explosive and incendiary bombs, along with the flammable nature of Tokyo's wooden buildings, led to widespread destruction and loss of life. The Tokyo firebombing resulted in one of the deadliest and most destructive air raids in history. The intense firestorm consumed over 16 square miles of the city, leaving more than 100,000 people dead and over 1 million homeless. Entire neighborhoods were reduced to ash, and the infrastructure of the city was severely damaged. The Tokyo firebombing had a profound psychological and strategic impact on Japan. The scale of destruction and loss of life shocked the Japanese government and populace, eroding morale and fostering a sense of hopelessness. The raid also demonstrated the devastating power of strategic bombing and underscored the Allies' determination to bring the war to a swift conclusion. The Tokyo firebombing remains a controversial and tragic chapter in World War II history. While it hastened Japan's surrender and contributed to the end of the war, it also raised ethical questions about the targeting of civilian populations and the use of indiscriminate bombing tactics. The legacy of the firebombing serves as a sobering reminder of the human cost of war and the need for efforts to prevent such devastation in the future. The bombing of Dresden refers to the devastating air raid conducted by the Allied forces on the German city of Dresden during World War II. Dresden, located in eastern Germany, was known for its rich cultural heritage and historic architecture. By early 1945, as Allied forces advanced on Germany from both east and west, Dresden had become a significant transportation and communication hub, hosting a large number of refugees fleeing the advancing Red Army. The primary objective of the bombing of Dresden was to disrupt German transportation and communication networks, as well as to undermine the morale of the civilian population and the German military. Dresden was also believed to house industrial targets that could contribute to Germany's war effort. The bombing raid on Dresden was part of the broader Allied strategy to weaken German infrastructure and break the morale of the civilian population. The mission was carried out by the British Royal Air Force and the United States Army Air Forces, which coordinated their efforts to conduct a series of bombing raids. On February 13 to 14, 1945, a massive air raid was launched against Dresden. British and American bombers dropped thousands of tons of high-explosive and incendiary bombs on the city, causing widespread destruction and igniting fires that raged for days. The bombing continued for several days, with subsequent raids exacerbating the devastation. The bombing of Dresden resulted in the near-total destruction of the city center and the deaths of tens of thousands of civilians. Estimates of the death toll vary widely, with some sources suggesting that as many as 25,000 to 40,000 people were killed in the raids. The city's historic buildings, including its famous Baroque architecture, were extensively damaged or destroyed. The bombing of Dresden serves as a stark reminder of the horrors of war and the devastating impact of aerial bombardment on civilian populations. The destruction of Dresden's cultural heritage and the loss of innocent lives underscore the need for restraint and ethical considerations in the conduct of warfare. The legacy of the bombing continues to be a subject of reflection and debate, prompting discussions about the morality of targeting civilian populations and the use of force in armed conflict.